Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/The Rob Burgess Show. Over 250,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hello, and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I am, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 28th episode, our guest is John Seabrook. But before we get to that, I need to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor. For you, the listeners of the Rob Burgess Show podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. A book which pertains to this episode is The Song Machine by today's guest, John Seabrook. Whatever book you pick, you can exchange it at any time, you can cancel at any time, and the books are yours to keep. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/The Rob Burgess Show. Again, that's audibletrial.com/The Rob Burgess Show for your free audiobook. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review everywhere the podcast is available. Whether it's iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Facebook, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, or RSS, you can find links to everything on the official website, www.therobburgessshow.com. You can also find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com. Back to today's show. John Seabrook is the author of The Song Machine, Inside the Hit Factory, published in hardback by Norton in October 2015. The paperback edition comes out October 18th. He is also the author of Nobrow, The Culture of Marketing, The Marketing of Culture, which was published in 2000, and Deeper, My Two-Year Odyssey in Cyberspace, which was published in 1997, and Flash of Genius and Other True Stories of Invention, published in 2008. He has been a contributor to The New Yorker since 1989 and became a staff writer in 1993. He explores the intersection between creativity and commerce in the fields of technology, design, and music. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife and 2 children and a dog and a cat. And now on to the show.
Hey, Rob, sorry.
Oh, hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good. I didn't catch you at a bad time, did I?
No, this is good. I was just cleaning up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
This is perfect.
Okay, cool. All right, well, thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So you might want to just start out by telling us about your musical background, kind of before you delved into the realms of pop music. What were you listening to, and what kind of music do you find yourself listening to for pleasure just before all this here?
Well, there's kind of 2 different components, I guess. I mean, I grew up with the music of the 70s, so which was sort of, the great rock and roll of the early period with the Stones, and there's just the Led Zeppelin, sort of a tail end of Led Zeppelin. But anyway, there was a lot of fantastic rock and roll in the 70s. There was also, Neil Young and stuff like that. And so, you kind of form your musical taste in that era when you're a teenager. I don't think you ever really changed. So in terms of my music, I would say that's probably my music. And now I kind of play covers of those songs in a band. It's a sort of another way of maybe sort of enjoying those songs. So I kind of started out listening to them, and then I ended up kind of like playing them as a, sort of middle-aged person. But in terms of new music, I say I listen to hip-hop mainly, for new music, just because I just find it the most exciting genre. It's always kind of morphing. There's good periods and not such great periods, but now I think it's kind of an interesting good period. It's kind of combining with EDM in an interesting way. So that's kind of what I listen to. And pop is not something that I would probably ever really like sit down and listen to. Obviously, one of the themes of my book is you can't really avoid it. So if you're in the car at all, you're going to hear it, and if you're at a mall or a stadium or basically anywhere in urban life, you're going to hear it. And it's not like I have like it's not like I hated it or you know, but I guess my tastes are a little bit more, a little less mainstream than that, maybe. So I kind of I listen to it now because I'm interested in the scene and who's coming on and who the songwriters are, and of course my son is still listening to a lot of it, but it's not something that I kind of like really sit down and listen to for fun.
I see. So listening, I'm assuming you had to listen to a lot of this during the writing of the book.
Right.
Did it change your perception of the music at all? Like, did you start to appreciate things you hadn't appreciated before about the music?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I did come to appreciate, well, I mean, I've always appreciated the sort of magic that goes into making a song that just stands out and is a hit, you know, and that everybody listens to, you know. I mean, even if I'm not, you know, the person that song is made for, I have an interest in trying to figure out what that thing is, and you can never really say exactly, because it's always got to be a little bit new, I think, but I listen to pop music now, kind of a little bit more aware of that, trying to figure out that thing. And of course, I'm also now much more aware of who wrote the songs. Like I like to figure out, you know, particularly of the people in my book, you know, because it's basically been in pop. You know, in pop history, careers don't last that long, unlike other sort of forms of human endeavor. So writing a book about, you know, people who are sort of the moment in the pop world has this kind of built-in liability to it, is that, you know, it might not last very long, like they may not last very long. So now I'm just kind of interested in, like, are these people actually going to stick around? And so far, I mean, one of the most amazing things, really, is sort of or at least post-writing of the book, is how Max Martin, who was already basically at the top of the game, has even gone to a higher level, you know, with Taylor Swift and The Weeknd and Ariana Grande than he was, you know, post Katy Perry. So that's been something I've watched with interest. I did a afterword for the paperbacks where I kind of tried to bring this stuff up to date. And, of course, the Dr. Luke thing developed quite a bit afterwards as well. So that was something that was a different thing. That was a little bit like the characters in your book kind of come to life and sue each other. You know? So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Continuingly, you know.
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, speaking of Max Martin, I mean, one of the things I mentioned in the column I wrote that I did while I was reading the book is I went and I just looked up Max Martin because I, of course, started to hear about it reading in your book, and I was like, is this person really? And I, you know, like you said about things when you're 12 or whatever, when you're coming up as a kid, those will always kind of make an imprint. Man, I was 12 in 95, and you want to talk about, like, Max Martin ruling the airwaves, basically writing, like, 40% of all the music from my youth, and it's just, like, hit after hit, and it's just like, oh my gosh, this was one person doing all this.
And that was just his first iteration. And then he had, like, another one, and then another one.
Yeah.
Now he's on his third.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's crazy. And one thing I thought was interesting about when you talk about him and also Dennis Pop and some of these other Scandinavian, songwriters is that, maybe having a English as a second language perspective actually helped them, as opposed to what you kind of talked about how in the past, if you want to take it back to like Irving Berlin and all these classic standards writers of American pop music back through the ages, it's all about wordplay and there's a lot of innuendo and these people can barely speak English that they're writing these from Sweden and Norway and that, but it actually helps them because they can just kind of whatever sounds good, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah, I think partly, like, Irving Berlin probably wasn't writing with the idea that he's going to be, like, a global hit, probably. Mm-hmm. One thing is, like, they were thinking that their audience was all English speakers and, that they were all probably pretty educated and would get the references. I think if Irving Berlin was writing today, you would find that most people just wouldn't get it, because I don't know if that means the audience is dumber, but I think the audience is definitely a lot bigger in terms of non-English speakers. Mm-hmm. And but I also think that songwriting has, I think, evolved away from more of a literary practice where, literary devices like double entendre and metaphor were used freely, just the way they would be used in poetry, to kind of more of a sonic composition. Mm-hmm. This is greatly aided by technology, in which, the power of the tools of music software really kind of come first, I think, in most composers' experience and minds, and just in terms of like what's exciting and kind of what you can learn too. Mm-hmm. A kid can learn music software and relatively quickly make a pretty professional sounding track, but to learn language and poetry and get good at words, that takes a lot more time. And so I just sort of feel like it's partly driven by technology, and maybe it's just inevitable given the nature of songs, which are they do have a very strong, obviously, musical component. They're not just words, and I feel like you could probably make an argument that they sort of emerge, that the Greek bards were sort of singing stories like the Iliad, and that they kind of emerged from the literary tradition, but now I think, and particularly in the last 20, 30 years, and kind of what I'm writing about in the book, they've really crossed over into a very sort of sonic thing. And I think the other thing there is that the number of authors involved in creating a song traditionally was one or two. There was always sort of two usually, and up until Jagger and Richards and Lennon McCarthy and all the musicals you can think with Rodgers and Hammerstein and stuff. But now there's way more than two authors usually involved in a song. Again, because technology allows you to collaborate with anyone, anywhere across the internet, and so I think songs are kind of becoming more like these kind of group products than sort of individual works of authorship. And I think that also kind of moves them away from sort of a literary tradition, and into more of something maybe more like television or something where it's kind of written by groups.
Right. Well, and you kind of talk about this in the book a lot because you have people that do the top line that kind of do that part of it, and then that's separate from the person that does the beat, and then there's a person that does the melody. So it's almost kind of like the Henry Ford, modular. You do this, you do this. It's kind of specialization in one area as opposed to So it is kind of almost like it is the word factory is very apt. You know what I mean, to describe all this. So that's
it is with one qualification.
What's that?
One qualification, and that's that there's also kind of like an information processing component to it. Like a factory is sort of a metaphor that sort of precedes the information age, and kind of one of the things that's enabling a lot of this stuff to happen is that it's kind of moved away. Like the production of songs is very much part of the information age now, and so like the metaphor of like a giant computer or you know, a processor is probably as apt in some ways as a factory, but certainly in terms of the specialization and the emphasis on like output and product, you know, and tending toward uniformity, all of that is very sort of factory-like. Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. Now, I don't know if I don't think you discussed this in the book, but you probably have heard about this. Have you heard about the millennial whoop?
No.
Okay. It's this concept, and it's not a new concept, but people have been saying it about music of the last few years. It's a familiar snippet of, it's a modulation between the third and fifth notes of the scale of the song, and it's something that is supposed to give you a familiarity with the song, even if you've never heard it before. It's apparently very common, and once I heard this compilation in this video I saw, it became very obvious what it was. It's the like it's kind of that thing, and people use it over and over again. But then somebody pointed out that, you know, this, you want to take it back to classical music. It's even, you know, and do 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 do. You know, it's not a new, you know, concept.
That's a great one.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting
millennial
thing.
Hoop.
Whoop, the millennial whoop. Yeah, I'll send you the link to the video. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like, yes, this is new, but in some ways it's not. One thing I thought that was interesting in the beginning of the book, you kind of talk about listening to these in the car with your son, and you talk about how the song has many hooks throughout the song. It's not just the one big hook at the chorus. You know, it's just little mini hooks throughout the song. And do you see that as kind of a newer concept in music? Because I feel like maybe that was kind of somewhat always there in popular music, maybe not to the degree it is now. But
there's an argument that, you know, the Beatles had a lot of hooks, and the Ramones tried to kind of get back to a lot of hooks, and certainly there was, you know, there's sort of an emphasis on hooky sort of parts of those songs, but I think you make a comparison to the way, if you watch a film, even from the 80s, you feel like the pacing is pretty slow, that, like, you know, compared to a film of today, there are a lot fewer cuts, and scenes tend to last longer, and, you know, it seems to kind of drag when you look at it from modernized, even if you really liked it back in the 80s. I sort of feel like something similar has kind of happened in popular song, that people used to give melody more time to develop, and you know, if you listen to like a Burt Bacharach melody or even a Paul McCartney melody, they flow, and yeah, there are hooks, but there's definite sort of parts, and, you know, you have to kind of wait for it, often a little longer, and it's just, I feel like it's structured differently, and that today's songs are sort of supercharged with hooks to grab you as soon as possible, and then really keep you from changing the channel or whatever it is, and that is driven by, I think, you know, the exigencies of CHR, Contemporary Hits Radio, mainly, and also that, you know, these songs are demanding attention in crowded, loud places where they're competing with a lot of other distractions, and, you know, have to make themselves heard, and you know, that's what they do. So yeah, I think you're right that there was, you could probably say that pop music sort of forgot about the importance of the hook, and that the Swedes came along to kind of remind us of that.
Right.
But I also think they pushed pretty far beyond, and really kind of working the whole track and hook method. Really, I think just kind of favors, more of a hook. And a hook isn't really a melody. I mean, it's like a condensed melody. It's like
a repeated phrase, I guess you'd say.
It's not a riff either, though. It's melodic. It's more melodic than a riff, but it's less melodic than a melody, than like a whole melody.
Yeah.
You wouldn't call a hook a melody, right?
Right.
It's like a condensed melody, or it's the way the melody is structured so that it has those things. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's different, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Now, to kind of go back to the wordplay and stuff, you didn't really talk about this too much in the books. I know this is more focused on pop music, but it's kind of been interesting what's happened to country music, or whatever passes for country music these days. It seems like that may be the last bastion of kind of wordplay, as far as, using, you look like I need a drink, things like, these kind of turns of garden path sentences and things like that. So,
in English, they really play on like puns and like wordplay. There's a lot of wordplay in country music. Unfortunately, so much of it is constrained within these conventions of, be in the truck or having to be in the bar, and or on the female side, like scratching your keys on the side of the guy's pickup truck because he cheated on you.
Yeah.
It would be great, and I think songwriters like Jason Isbell or Chris Stapleton, they can do that and break out of the country mold. And there's a lot of potential there, because the bro country thing is really just, I don't know, it doesn't do it for me. I'm not one of those bros.
Right. Well, I like the actual classic country. My son's middle name is Cash, so you can kind of guess where that comes from. So.
Yeah, totally. I love Johnny Cash. Everyone loves Johnny Cash.
Sure, absolutely. Now, it's interesting too with the Swedes and the kind of Scandinavians, because you talk about this in the book, but it's basically they're reflecting our own culture back at us, but by a delay of a couple of years. So when the Backstreet Boys come out, you kind of talk about this, how it's this amalgamation of different things that are not really in fashion, and it's like, was anyone screaming for a Euro pop, thing in 95 or whatever? Right. Not really, but apparently, we were ready. Enough time had passed since the initial wave that we were ready to reabsorb that. So it's almost like a mirror reflected back onto American culture of its own, whatever's left over from the previous waves or whatever. So
it's kind of like, it's like you take it apart, you put it back together. It's a little bit, it's like 10 degrees off center or something. It's not exactly the way it would have been if it were made by an American. But it kind of works. It makes it strange enough and different enough that it sounds kind of new or something, even if you don't know what it is. I don't know. It's just. And maybe it's not new anymore. I think it was certainly new. Like, "Hit Me Baby One More Time" still sounds kind of new, even though it's old. It kind of brought something together about. Maybe it was the rock elements were in there. It was all those. There was sort of an R&B element. There was a rock element. There were all these kind of like flavors of songs that, again, I think if you were an American, and I talk a lot in the book about the whole racial component of this too. That if you're an American songwriter and you're white, you really don't think, oh, I'm going to sit down and write an R&B song now. It's just not like something you are in any way bred or prepared culturally to do. But in Sweden, you do. You say, and that's exactly what these guys did. They just said, hey, let's write an R&B song for TLC, and we'll call it "Hit Me Baby One More Time," and that's what they did. And then TLC said, we're not going to sing that song, and then they gave it to Britney Spears, and I think they kind of did that again and again. They sort of kept trying to write songs for black people, and because it was cool, like everybody tries, but they kept coming out as like, you know, kind of R&B sounding songs for white people.
Yeah.
Until finally, with The Weeknd, Max actually did write a song for a black guy.
Right.
So.
Finally cracked it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. And you also talk a lot about this, especially when you talk about Ace of Base. You know, you kind of break down the lyrics of some of their songs, and it's like these, you know, no native English speaker would have come up with this, you know, string of words right here. And if you want to go with Britney Spears, you know, that song, and I guess TLC, there's an interesting alternate history to think about if they had actually recorded that song. But but the Hit Me Baby, I remember when that came out, that was like, oh, is this domestic violence? Are we talking about this right now? Like, it's such an awkward thing to like wedge into like a you know, an otherwise kind of, you know, pop song, you know what I mean? So.
I know, it was totally Swedish. It would never have happened if it wasn't a Swede.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then kind of off the backs of Backstreet Boys, you kind of have the rise of NSYNC and kind of the Mickey Mouse Club generation with of course Britney and Christina and all that. You kind of mentioned this too. You talk about how when Lou Pearlman, who of course recently died, was putting together NSYNC, he was basically trying to find people that could actually sing, because it wasn't always the knock on the Backstreet Boys is because they couldn't really sing.
You got that slightly wrong. It was Lou was copying New Kids on the Block.
Oh, okay, got it.
New Kids on the Block was the first of the kind of white modern boy bands that did sort of, but there was a whole thing about how they couldn't sing, and a big, and you know, before your time a little bit, there was actually an even bigger scandal right around that same time with Milli Vanilli.
Okay.
They won a Grammy as the best new artist, and then it turned out they hadn't actually sung on their track, and they had to take the Grammy away. So there was this, and this was like a much bigger deal than you would think it would be. Everyone was like shocked that, you know, singers weren't actually singing their songs, and so Lou's thing with the Backstreet Boys was to prove that, you know, they really could sing, and they really could sing. That he would have them sing a cappella at all of their shows, at least, you know, one song, to prove that they could sing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Now, you kind of talked a little bit about this in the beginning here, but the Kesha Dr. Luke thing has been very interesting to watch. You know, with the artist kind of rebelling against the producer. I guess it would be good to kind of give an overview of, you kind of talk about this too in the book, how, you know, the rise of the producer as the role of kind of string puller, it wasn't always like that, right? I mean, the producer was not always the mastermind, right? This is kind of a newer development.
It is a newer development to the extent that the producers are now, you know, technically capable of so much in the studio. But, you know, of course, Phil Spector was really the first of the sort of model of the super producers that really were more important than the artists, saw themselves as more important than the artists in creating the songs. And you know, that's a tradition that then you could say Brian Wilson was inspired by Phil Spector, and of course he was also a great songwriter. But you know, a lot of those Beach Boys songs were very studio-made songs as well. But then certainly in the singer-songwriter era, you know, the sort of 60s, 70s, later 60s and 70s into the mid-80s, I would say, the producers were, you know, basically hired hands to the artists, you know, like Led Zeppelin or The Who. I mean, they tended to, you know, David Bowie work with Tony Visconti. I mean, they tended to work. There was definitely like a small group of, you know, it was Glyn Johns. There was sort of a small group of guys that those bands would work with, but they were essentially, you know, recording the band's live sound, you know, to one extent or another. And it wasn't really, I think, until, you know, a lot of it came from hip-hop originally. The tradition of the producer as the kind of mastermind, I think, owes as much to, you know, the roots of hip-hop and the role that the producer plays, you know, in hip hop is a very important influence on today's pop production. That's one of the kind of things that I think is little understood about today's pop production, is that it really doesn't derive as much from the way standards were created with, sort of a melody writer and a lyric writer, but it really derives more from the way like reggae and early hip-hop was created, where you had a guy who was making like rhythm tracks, and then you had a rapper coming in and rapping over them, that which is now like what the hook writer does in that situation. But so yeah, I can't remember how we started that. But,
well, you actually have a pretty interesting section about one person that does the hooks. Is Esther Dean? Is that her name? Yeah. She does the hooks, right? She kind of sings like kind of nonsense words over the beat, and then kind of constructs it that way. And she was trying to become an artist in her own right, at least as I remember in the book. Had she made any progress? I forget.
She is still working on becoming like a named artist. I'm not sure where that stands, but she has kind of a whole second career as a voice actor in animated films, and also in the Two Pitch Perfect movies. She played the black lesbian among the Bellas, and has got quite a following through that.
Interesting.
So she's kind of just an outsized personality, and she continues to write hooks. She's had a couple recently. She's definitely still at the top, 2 or 3 hook writers that you get in at probably considerable expense to work on an album.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Well, I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary 20 Feet from Stardom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and they have that little montage in that of all the backup singers, who didn't quite make it or whatever. Right. So I can understand the pull of wanting to be that person or whatever, especially if you're that close to it for so long. So
for sure, it's hard to. Of course, that's what you want.
Sure.
That's another thing about Max Martin that I think makes him, at least has allowed him to last for as long as he's lasted, is that he really doesn't want to be an artist. He tried it at the beginning of his career. I guess he didn't like it, and he's perfectly happy to be behind the scenes, and that's pretty rare in this world. Most people are not that happy to be behind the scenes. They want to be in front of the scene.
Sure, absolutely. And he wasn't even involved in pop music at the beginning of his career, right? His first iteration was like a black metal band or something, right?
It was like a glam metal band, but glam metal. There's something about glam metal and pop. The guy who writes, Justin Traynor, who wrote Sorry for Justin Bieber, and he's written a couple of other big kind of pop hits recently. Before that was the lead singer of this glam metal band called Semi-Precious Weapons, who were really pretty far. I actually saw them because they opened for Lady Gaga at Radio City Music Hall, and they were out there. They were not mainstream. They were offensive and aggressively gay and aggressively loud and metally, and all the little girls who come to see Lady Gaga, their parents were completely freaking out in the audience. And that guy is now one of the top pop writers in the game. So I don't know. I think part of it is glam metal is a lot. It's very dramatic. There's the vocal, even though it's often sort of hard to take, is a very significant part of the song. It's theatrical, and I think pop benefits from being theatrical like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have made that connection, but I think that's probably a pretty good comparison there. Now, one thing I've been dying to talk to you about because my one of my best friends lives in South Korea, and he teaches English there. So we've been on the podcast before talking about this, but he always tells me about the K-pop happening over there, and this figures in pretty heavily into your book for good reason, because it is one of the most emerging markets for pop music in the world, and it's you want to talk about a factory system. I mean, these people live in like dormitories, and they're recruited in 18 hours a day, and so it's I don't know. It's almost a hyper version of our system, even more so than we do. And what do you think the it's interesting seeing the only person breaking through really is the Gangnam Style, and he's like this kind of schlubby 40-year-old guy in all these.
He's outside the whole system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. You're right. It is like the most extreme version of a factory system that was sort of started here by Lou, but before that by Berry Gordy, Motown, and some other places as well. And they just took it kind of farther than we would probably ever take it. It's a little bit, you could sort of think of it as sort of like Samsung versus Apple, maybe. It's sort of like the people that innovate, and of course this, Apple also took ideas from other people, but if you looked at Apple as the one that sort of, broke through with the iPhone, and then, which was maybe like rock and roll or something, and then Samsung came along and kind of copied it, but added to it and improved it and changed it a little bit, and that's kind of like what sort of like K-pop, or we could say from boy bands like Backstreet Boys was like the iPhone, and then like G-Dragon is like Samsung or something. But so I think they definitely like took the idea from Backstreet Boys, and NSYNC, and then they added Korean elements. But interestingly, it doesn't seem to really work when it comes back here. Like the Swedish thing works great, and it's very much sort of intended for this market. But the K-pop thing, it seems too artificial, I think, for Americans.
Right.
We demand, whether it's, right or hypocritical or just diluted, this notion of authenticity, but we demand a certain level of authenticity from our performers, I think. And the notion that they're completely created by a factory system in the way they are in K-pop is one or two notches beyond what we're willing to tolerate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why Psy did break through, because no one's going to like design, a pudgy guy's horseback riding dance as a thing that's going to break, and so that's just an element that is a difference in our cultures, I guess. But I think as long as K-pop has that, highly artificial quality, it does seem to be influential. I think more on the hip-hop side probably than the pop side, but the production is extremely over-the-top synth-driven, and that sort of more consistent with the hip-hop side of EDM side of things, and then also I think the clothes and the styles of the videos are sort of more consistent with kind of hip-hop style than K-pop. So I see that as being an area of influence, and probably will grow. And maybe there'll be like one unique star. You thought it was just going to be this guy G-Dragon, and maybe it could be. But maybe there'll be one unique star that crosses over. But I don't think the groups like the 7 or 8, 9 girl groups that were really going to make it big in the States. There's just too many of them.
Exactly. Like some of these groups, there was one, I can't remember what the name was. Maybe it was 21. I don't remember. But they have a dozen members. It's like, how am I supposed to keep track of all these people?
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I was listening to a Radio Lab episode the other day from a couple months ago about K-pop, and I thought it was interesting that a big scandal in the K-pop world was that these two members of two different groups were dating, because you're not even supposed to date because you belong to the fans or whatever. So maybe that goes along with what you're saying about unreality or whatever. It's like we don't expect that level of commitment from our pop stars. They can date somebody. You know what I mean? So.
I mean, it's true that our pop stars live in this bizarre sort of fake world where Justin Bieber does date Selena Gomez and they break up, or Britney Spears dates, Justin Timberlake, and then, things do kind of happen in this sort of weirdly, sort of by design Disney way, but I guess that's just, it's not really being designed by any one person. It's just the way the system kind of works out, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Now you have sections about Rihanna and Katy Perry and some of the newer versions of this pop star iteration. Do you see any difference in how their careers are going as opposed to the kind of previous generation of the Britney Spears and Christinas and all that?
Well, they're lasting a pretty long time. I think Rihanna's lasted longer now than Britney before having a breakdown, on her first go around, and Christina Aguilera actually really wasn't a big presence for too long either. I mean, we have like a Beyonce, Rihanna, to a certain extent Katy Perry. Those are careers that are now, in pop terms, getting pretty long and don't really show any signs of flagging anytime soon. And I think maybe the difference is, and this is just sort of a general difference in culture, but it's more and more, I think, popular to think of artists in terms of brands as being kind of these giant brands that are, created like brands are, and nurtured and invested in. And then when they get valuable, it's you protect the brand at all costs and try to, extend the brand. And I think there's a mindset among young managers and label executives that that's how you go about developing a major star and keeping them around. And also I think having social media at their disposal so they don't really have to interact with the press and don't really have to answer any questions they don't really want to answer also makes it, I think, possible to last longer. You sort of avoid scandals and or images, unflattering images that you are forced to traffic in before social media because you needed the press to give you exposure, and of course the press didn't always do what you wanted them to do. But with social media, you can project exactly, usually the image you want to project, and I think that also helps people last longer. And finally, I guess, the pop period, the sort of pure pop phase has lasted a very long time now. I sort of charted from, since you've been gone in 2004, 12 years is almost unheard of in terms, if you believe in the cycles that I wrote about in the book that Guy Zapolian came up with, where you had like kind of a pure pop center, but that inevitably got kind of boring and led to what he called the doldrums, and then the doldrums were, of course, boring, and and then the younger crowd would sort of move away to the extremes and then music you would get, grunge or punk, or to a certain extent, sort of hip hop in the early 2000s. With Eminem and 50 Cent and stuff. And then it would kind of swing back to the middle and start again. But that hasn't really happened since since the early 2000s, I think, since Eminem. It's pretty much smooth sailing. And so I think that's also a reason why, people have lasted longer now.
Yeah, you're right, because there was always kind of that pendulum swing from the quote-unquote fake to the quote-unquote real. You had, hair metal to Nirvana, and then, Britney Spears back to the White Stripes. But yeah, it seems like it's kind of just, it mostly pop going forward. It doesn't seem to be swinging back. Do you think that's because we live in more of a monoculture at this point as opposed to a varied culture, or what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, there's definitely a monoculture. In another book, I kind of had this, in my book Nobrow, I had this image of there's sort of like two grids. There's like a big grid and a small grid, and like the big grid is like kind of this monoculture that everybody is more and more connected to, and through Twitter or whatever, just kind of knows if anything happens. And then there's this small grid, which is your own sort of like little subculture of vegan whatever interests, and that's only a few people you share with, and that as the bigger one gets bigger, the smaller one gets smaller. So yeah, I'm going to stay with that and say that I was right, and that's kind of what you've seen happen more. I think that's one of the roles that these songs play on that sort of big grid, is that they provide something to share with people who you don't know otherwise, except through social media. You can comment on a video by Drake, whether you like his dance or do you not like his dance, or, that's kind of stuff that people kind of form, if not friendships, then relationships around. And so, I think that's where the people who were talking about the small grid, not the small grid, the long tail, back in 10 years ago, this idea that the internet would end the reliance on hits, as much at least, because there was infinite shelf space on the internet as opposed to a limited number of shelf space in a record store, and so you didn't just have to stock the big sellers, you could stock everything, and then taste could do what it wanted to do, and it wouldn't be manipulated by these commercial interests, and the middle class artists would thrive. Of course, none of that so far has happened, and partly it's because of the way artists are getting paid, but it's also partly because it turns out that even if you give people infinite shelf space, and maybe especially when you give people infinite shelf space, they really want to listen to what other people are listening to, at least part of the time,
right.
Because otherwise it's kind of lonely.
Yeah.
So I think that social media kind of, the thing that the long tail people didn't see coming was social media, maybe, and social media created this whole new demand for pop hits, and also in the movies, for mega Marvel comic
sequels,
blockbuster sequels,
right?
And stuff. It's the same phenomenon in a way.
Yeah, that's funny how that works. You'd think that the more choice you'd get, the more varied things you hear, but it just seems to get more and more samey. You know what I mean? So,
yeah,
it's interesting. One thing I wanted to ask you about, I wanted to get your opinion on this. The Marvin Gaye lawsuit against Robin Thicke, and I believe, was that Pharrell involved in that? Yeah. Now, that was an interesting case, because then we also had the Led Zeppelin case with Stairway to Heaven. They stole that from, what was the name of the band they meant to have stolen? Spirit, there you go. That was probably a little more blatant, but I thought the Got to Give It Up, Blurred Lines thing was interesting, because I didn't really see that as, you can definitely tell, there's a similarity there. I don't know, does it just seem like maybe there's only so many notes you can play, and it's like we've explored all the combinations of some of those notes, and it's like, Marvin Gaye's going to exist forever, and we still have to keep creating new music, so maybe something's going to sound like it eventually. You know what I mean? It didn't seem like an exact carbon copy, but it definitely was, inspired by or whatever. So
yeah, I think most musicians and people who know anything about songwriting were kind of horrified by that ruling, because it was wrong, essentially. The jury didn't really follow the instructions. You can't copyright a song. You can copyright certain aspects of songs, words and melody, but you can't really copyright feel. You can't copyright, a rhythm pattern or a chord progression. But of course, when a jury hears two songs that sound similar, they kind of disregard the actual, letter of the law and say, yeah, these two songs sound similar. And then Robin Thicke did himself no favors by giving the interview with GQ where he actually said that they put on that song, Gotta Give It Up, when they were composing Blurred Lines.
Right.
And that's what's called in the business a reference track.
Mm-hmm.
And, people play them all the time in studios. And that's what one of the things that producers do at the beginning of sessions. They say, okay, I heard, this song from the 90s, this remix by, whoever, and just listen to this, and then often whatever comes out it has something to do with that song, so as soon as like this ruling came out, all this do that immediately, of course, freaked out. It's like because now they could get sued, and I note that Marvin Gaye estate is now suing Ed Sheeran over one of his songs. If you open the door to this kind of thing, you're going to get a ton of suits. And yes, there are, a finite number of notes. Mm-hmm. And yes, the way people listen to music and the way people compose music is very sample-based. So if you're not literally sampling some other song, you're kind of like, informally sampling it. And that's more true, than ever with the technology to do it, mm-hmm. developing. So I think it's like that ruling was very much out of step with the way things are going, and it's being appealed. The Led Zeppelin ruling, I will note, Led Zeppelin was found not guilty.
That's true.
Of infringement of Spirit's song, and I actually felt there that the similarities were closer, and that Led Zeppelin, might lose or at least be forced to give up some credit to the estate of Randy California, who was the guy who, the song was called Taurus, mm-hmm. The original song. But no, the jury found that Led Zeppelin didn't infringe because that kind of descending scale that, Stairway to Heaven starts with, is a commonly used technique going back into, as you said, Renaissance music.
Sure.
I think that was probably, I don't know, but I'm happier with that ruling.
Yeah, right.
Even though Led Zeppelin could share some of that money, probably.
I'm sure they could afford one island less than they have, or whatever. Of course, then you have John Fogerty being sued for sounding like himself, but that's a different thing. So.
That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
People maybe don't remember, but David Geffen actually once sued Neil Young for turning in a non-commercial album.
Really? What album was that?
It was after On the Beach. Was it Tusk? I can't remember. Or no, Tusk was Fleetwood Mac. Mm-hmm. It was after On the Beach when he got pretty strange.
Interesting.
For a while.
I'll have to remember that one. So you've written about all these manufactured pop groups, and you've definitely seen, like you mentioned, the Britney Spears breakdown, and now she's in a lifetime conservatorship with her lawyer and her dad. Does any of this ever creep you out to write about this? Because, I mean, it almost seems kind of like the child actor thing. It's like these people become so famous at such a young age, and they're not in control of their career or what they're saying or what they're symbolizing or whatever. Does it ever unsettle you to write about this stuff?
Only on the level of being a parent of a son who wants to be an actor, is an actor, and would like to be a professional actor. I mean, that's one reason that he's not going to a conservancy, at 18, but he's actually going to college. Is that I think, Britney Spears. I thought one of the most poignant lines in the book is in the section about Britney Spears when it's a school report. She went to like the Mickey Mouse school, literally. It's called the Mickey Mouse School when she was in the Mickey Mouse Club, and that's where she learned whatever she learned. They didn't teach evolution, of course, so that would be too controversial. And in the report, like from her headmaster or something, it was like, Brittany has absolute trust in adults and always does exactly what they tell her to do. And that probably is exactly what she did. And they kept telling her to wear that short. I mean, she no doubt had a hand in it, and tie your uniform up or whatever. But she was used, as a sex object, as a child, by men that were much older and knew what they were doing more than she did. And that happens all the time, in one way or another. And some people. And it usually is women who are very young, girls, who have to sign these long contracts. The thing that came out about the Kesha thing was just, the fact that her contract was, pretty standard contract, and it was a 6-album contract, so you're having to sign away your whole professional life at the age of 16 to some guy who shows interest in you for reasons that you don't really maybe quite fathom, and was a lot older, and and the whole business has got a lot of sleazy people in it. I mean, there's a lot of people in the music business that are there because they're really good at hustling. That's like the one bedrock quality that you really need to have if you're going to make it. You have to just like hustle, and even if you have no other talent, if you have like enough hustle, you can probably make some kind of money somehow, because they're just the rules and standard rules of practice just aren't as established as they are in a lot of other businesses. And there's a long history of essentially ripping people off, ripping black artists off, keeping the publishing rights that people didn't understand their value, taking credit where credit was not deserved. All that kind of stuff has been going on for a long, long time in the music business, and it's sort of naive to think that it doesn't exist maybe in its most naked form anymore, but everybody kind of has that attitude, or a lot of people do, at the back of their mind. You take whatever you can get, essentially. Right.
Yeah, that's probably very true. Now you write for a pretty highbrow publication there, and all these things we've been talking about are generally considered kind of low culture. So what is it like to write for kind of a highbrow audience about these kind of things? Because I'm sure a lot of people who read your work maybe aren't, I'm familiar with it, but it may just because of my age or whatever, but like I knew all these people just from growing up and being saturated with it, but I can't imagine everybody that reads your work is already familiar. So
yeah, it's challenging. I mean, it's always challenging working for the New Yorker, in that the audience is very demographically broad. A lot of the people are not that young, particularly the subscribers, and they really are sort of like bread and butter. They're the people that keep subscribing year after year and kind of, really keep us going. And the advertisers are more sort of a fickle bunch. And, so, you would imagine that the people who are doing the ad buying are young people who are very sort of plugged into this stuff. But the people who are the subscribers are probably a good bit older. So you sort of try to reach both, ideally, but you can't, talk over the head of the subscribers and use a lot of jargon words that they don't understand and make kind of like assumptions about stuff that they don't know, because then they'll just get really turned off, and you just sort of feel like you're kind of violating your contract in some way by doing that. I mean, you don't want to do that. But of course, you don't want to like repeat obvious stuff that's been said before to the young people, so that they just think you're lame and out of it. So really, the only way that you can kind of solve that, there's two ways you can tell a story that hasn't been told before, and even if like the information in it is known, if you tell it in a new way, it seems new, or you can like just strive to think more deeply about it, or try to achieve insights that others haven't had, try to put information together in a different pattern to see things a different way, or to look at things from a different perspective in terms of time. I mean, one of the things that I think is unusual about the Song Machine is that when people write about this stuff, they tend to write about it for like magazines and newspapers, week to week, month to month. Who's got the hit song now? What's the hit song next? And there isn't really a longer perspective taken on this stuff. And then when people do take a longer perspective, they write about like Motown or eras that are past that you can treat as a historian, where they're not going to be making any more new songs. So Song Machine is in between those two things, and I think it's kind of unusual that way, but that's one of the I think one of the kind of things about it that made it unique and interesting is that it had that perspective that isn't taken that often, in covering this stuff. And even if you kind of know it, it seems like you didn't know it. And also, let's not discount nostalgia. I mean, the same reason that people like to listen to oldies, they might like to, like you read about the songs that they knew when they were kids. And a lot of these songs are, 20 years ago, 90s songs that you actually, I hear Ace of Base on the radio a lot now, not just The Sign, but also All That She Wants. There's like kind of that 20-year oldies cycle that does happen, and it fits into that kind of perfectly.
Yeah, as soon as I started hearing all the songs from my youth on the quote unquote oldies station, I'm like, all right, I guess I'm just old now. I guess this is where the line in the sand is. So.
Yeah,
for sure.
That happens, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
About it.
Yeah, definitely. So, what are you working on next? What's your next project?
Well, the thing I didn't do in the Song Machine was really get into any hip-hop producer working methods. It was very much of a sort of, white. I mean, Esther Dean is a black person, but it was essentially kind of the white wing of the pop world. And so I wanted to, I've been thinking about would it be possible to do that. Same kind of thing with hip-hop. I'm not sure if it would, just because, I'm kind of an older white guy. I'm not sure, like, how comfortable ultimately people would have. But anyway, did a piece about a young hip hop producer named Mike Will Made It, which was in the New Yorker like a month ago, and that was fun. And it came out pretty well, and it didn't seem like Mike. I mean, it kind of opened some other hip hop doors, and so I might try to do another hip hop piece, maybe about an artist. I'm not sure, and. Otherwise, there's been a lot of kind of TV interest in the Song Machine. The HBO option, the original article, which was the one about Esther Dean, and that kind of is, that kind of was the heart of the book, I think. And now they're actually making a pilot. They got this director named Alfonso Gomez Rion, who did Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. He's really a talented young Hispanic American director from Laredo, Texas, and he's gonna kind of make a musical.
Oh wow!
Out of it, which is kind of cool because when I was writing it, I would always tell people, I kind of feel like I'm writing a musical here, because it would be like you have a story, then you have a song, and then a story, and then a song, and then when he said I want to make a musical, I was like, yes, that's what I wanted to do.
That seems like a perfect fit, for sure.
Yeah, so I'm going to consult on that, and, I'm not going to write it or anything, but they need to find a writer, like a showrunner type person. But, I'm psyched about that, and otherwise, I do sort of, sometimes just off-topic stuff for the New Yorker, and, probably going to do some more of that stuff, too.
Cool. Well, last question, I always ask this. What have you been listening to lately? You talked a little bit about hip-hop. What artists have you been into here lately?
I think, I don't even know if these guys are ultimately going to last, but the songs Wale I like a couple songs of Wale. I think he calls it Wale, W-A-L-E.
Yeah.
I think Young Thug is extremely talented and innovative, although sometimes I think he goes a little too far, but of course I'm supposed to think he goes a little too far because I think that's what he's going for. But anyway, I think he's a very talented dude. I think Big Sean has a lot of talent and will mature and develop into a fantastic artist. Rich Homie Quan, I think, is super talented. And I think Kid Ink, although he's very kind of commercial, it sounds like soundtracks to Furious 7 or something. I still think he's got something, and and there are others too. I just sort of feel like that's where you're seeing a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm kind of excited about that.
Cool. Well, I love the book, and I can't wait to read whatever you do next, and I really thank you for coming on. You're welcome back anytime. So.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, when you're going to get it up, send me a link. I'd love to listen to it.
All right, will do. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, man.
All right, bye.
Have a good day.